Welcome to the New School and the Vera Liz Center for Art and Politics. And thanks for joining us tonight. It's not raining like the last talk we had, so it's a good night for a lecture. My name is Andrea Hickey. I'm the Associate Curator at the Public Art Fund. And I wanted to start by thanking our colleagues here at the New School and at Vera Liz, Karen Coney, Pam Tillis, and their whole team. It's the final talk of the season tonight, and our partners here have been great to work with over the last, 10 years plus now. And for those of you who don't know, we actually organize a seasonal series. We do 3 talks a semester, and they're usually on Wednesday nights, and we'll soon be posting our spring series. So check out our website and note our program on the dates. So as I mentioned, we are at our final talk of the season. We did a great talk with Jeff Koons in September. We did a wonderful talk last month with Abraham Cruz Villegas, and tonight we are welcoming Sam Falls on the occasion of his new exhibition, Light Over Time, which is now on view at Metrotech Center in downtown Brooklyn, and it'll be up until the end of May, so check it out if you haven't seen it already. I'm very pleased to introduce Sam tonight. We began speaking about a project in Brooklyn several years ago, and it was then that I realized the depth of his interest in the natural environment. Growing up in Vermont and now living in LA, it's easy to understand how these outdoor environments have influenced his work and play such an important role in the production of his diverse media. He's explored the effect of sunlight, rain, and time on such materials as paper, steel, painted aluminum, and cloth to produce works that reflect not only his interest in the history of minimalism, but also expand the idea of the photographic process to objects and experiences. Sam has recently had exhibitions at the Zabludowicz, I just killed that word, I'm sorry. It's a collection in London. You want to say? Zabludowicz. Sorry, everybody. The Pomona College Museum of Art in California, LAXART in Los Angeles, the Museo MADRE in Naples, and the International Center of Photography. And if you happen to be in Rome, he will have shows at the Guiliani Foundation, in Texas at the Ballroom Marfa, and in Los Angeles at the Hammer Museum coming up next year. Sam's exhibition, Light Over Time, represents his largest body of work in the public realm to date, and his approach to each of these works combines an interest in the natural environment with a focus on the experiential nature of art in public space. Visitors can explore the interior and exterior parts of his multicolored maze, make sounds using an enormous wind chime, or literally change the color of his tiled bench using the heat of their bodies. Of course, Sam is going to talk more about these works, and I'm looking forward to hearing more in general about his long-standing interest in working outdoors and in the public realm. So please join me in welcoming Sam Falls to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Sam, obviously. And, okay. So I wanted to start by introducing my work in general, because you might not be familiar with it, before going into too much stuff. That has nothing to do with me. But it looks great. And so I wanted to play first, before going, I'm going to play one of the most recent videos I've made, and then go into more of a chronological explanation of my work, and I'll probably talk really quickly in the beginning, and then I'll talk slower. But in the beginning, I wanted to just kind of say, I went to college to study science, specifically physics in the beginning, and I wasn't making art or anything. And my interest in art happened more from a relationship to semiotics and the study of language and how meaning is translated from words and then eventually symbols and visual art into, you know, the brain. And I took this class called like the philosophy of science just to fulfill my general education requirements, and I got obsessed with linguistics and started going and studying logic and taking philosophy classes, which turned into, you know, from Saussure quickly to like the Frankfurt School, which had more of a visual focus and relationship from linguistics to visual studies anyway, into, you know, just concentrating on art history. And then I went to graduate school in like 2010 to start really making artwork. And so I didn't have any super big allegiance to any medium, but photography was the thing at the time. And anyway, my true interest really came out of how people, and still is, how people relate to visual information and the object itself, and subtracting the role of the artist and making it something that is more immediate, but also a long-term relationship, not something that's static. So that's really how my relationship with the outdoors began, and working outside, I mean, relative to art, because it was something that was universal and easily understood. So a lot of what I was seeing in New York when I was going to school was like abstract photography, which was great because it was merging photography with the other arts at the time, but really becoming still a technical process, like whether it was the darkroom or a giant inkjet printer, it was still kind of alienating for a general viewer. So whatever. So that's how I started making work using the rain or the sun, like the sun especially, and I'll get into that. I should just show the video. So you get the idea. And this is a video that would loop forever, and I filmed it for about 4 hours over the course of low to high tide. And the advantage, or what's interesting to me about this is it encapsulates so much in the sense that what brought me to photography was this Rosalind Krauss essay that was my focus of the index, the sign, and the symbol, and how we translate meaning. And this word, the shifter, is a big thing. So like you could say you, referring to three different people, but it's the same word. So now is kind of, my interest in it is it's this temporal shifter linguistically, and so now is always referring to something else. It's impossible to refer to the same thing. So this is kind of this real physical embodiment of that in the video. And so that's, I got there from here. These are the first kind of works I showed with Matt here at West Street in New York, and they are craft paper, like construction paper, that I left in my window, and they were masked out. Like you can see the square in the blue one. They're hard to see on this projection. For about 4 days in my window in Bushwick, and when I lived in New York, and after that, it would fade the paper everywhere except for where this abstract shape was, and each one was different. You know, and I was led here basically because of escaping trying to use some technical processes that were related to photography, but at the same time it is a photographic photogram, like it's using light and an image, and so that was really exciting for me, even though it seemed aggressive at the time. It really meant something. And you know, the problem with these was that they weren't archival, so then the next thing I did was make these, which, well, the problem was twofold. They weren't archival, and also they weren't, you know, the abstract nature of them wasn't interesting or important to me. I was just cutting out random shapes. So these were the next ones I made, which took, instead of like 4 days, they took 4 or 5 months, and they're in the window in California, which worked better too. And they're rolled up paper. So instead of cutting out a shape, I just used the sort of material property of paper and rolled it and left it in the window. And afterwards, when they're unfurled, there's this image. So you're kind of looking at an image of the thing itself, and they're archival. So that solved one issue. The next issue was color and size. And so I started going to, what was another rule? California, and this is the first series I made in California. And this was great because I could using fabric, I could control the color, the scale, and even the shape if I wanted to. And that led me outdoors, and I was using my friend's backyard in Valverde up by CalArts. And the first series I did was really site-specific and remained, these works all kind of remain site-specific depending where they're made. And this one, he lived in this house that was being worked on by his landlord, and there are all these 2x4s. So what you're looking at is the impression of a the image of a 2x4 that was laid on fabric that was that original dark green, and then I left it out there for about 8 months. And it faded, and I used this thin cotton muslin because Valverde is like this CalArts kind of small hippie town where everyone has some prayer flags or whatever, so it seemed appropriate, including their house. So that was really nice to have the material be site-specific, but also end up with this image that really is at once abstract and also indexical. You can look at it and understand it's a 2x4 because it's like the common building block, but also it looks kind of like a Barnett Newman zip, and it has this relationship to abstract painting at the same time. So that was really exciting, and you know, I used his backyard for a while, and eventually moved to LA to make more works like this. So there's an installation. Can you all hear me okay? And thanks, Andrea, for the introduction. So this is when I moved to California. This was, my same friend moved, and he had a bigger backyard, so I did this in his backyard again. And I collected tires from around the neighborhood, and it kind of was, for me, interesting to deal with like car culture and also having that sort of scale. And here I used a polyester, and I put the tires down from the neighborhood on top of that giant red polyester, and then stretched it around the gallery when I did the show. And again, you have this really nice abstraction, but also, of course, this super common visual object in LA. See how it kind of looks like a car even. And then it expanded this practice, so finding each material that was appropriate for the subject matter. So we were making a garden in Topanga where we lived, and this is lattice that I put on different stains of wood, which was funny too, because each title, of course, is the place where it was made, but also this, I think, is Old English or something, and they had these funny references in the names. These are gardening hoses, but again, they look kind of like a, you know, like a Bryce Martin stick drawing a little bit, which I thought was funny. This is in Joshua Tree where I dyed linen by hand. You know, some is pre-dyed and some is hand-dyed, depending on the subject matter, I guess. And I covered rocks and left it there and went back and collected it. And so these are more of the inverse. It's like a positive instead of a negative. And so what's interesting too along these lines is like how these picked up the salt from the rocks themselves and stained the fabric, and also like the first ones I did in this field in Valverde, mice would chew through it, and it would kind of have a feeling of the place. So relative to photography and what I had studied, it was, I mean, it was really hard to go from like a nice framed photograph to photographs with like, you know, bird shit and salt stains and these things, but also at the same time, it was really about a place, and it carried it with it instead of being a photograph of a place and transferred to color paper, inkjet paper, and losing this quality. These, I think, really started to retain qualities of space and not just image them or represent them. They kind of became them. This was my backyard in Venice when we moved from Topanga. And I had tried to build this Donald Judd bookshelf at our place in Topanga, which was okay, but it wasn't great, and it fell apart when we moved, and I couldn't rebuild it. And so I had this idea became interesting to me of appropriating this appropriation that I had done. So this wood, which is kind of indexical to his furniture, I stretched this burlap around in our garden, which, you know, like in Vermont where I grew up, we always had to wrap our plants in burlap so they wouldn't freeze in the frost. And so I don't know, that's why I chose burlap, because it was the garden, I mean. And then this is the show of them. So afterwards you had this positive, and then I had them framed in a upholstered frame in burlap, so it kind of created, when you see it in person it's better, but it looks like you're looking through it a little bit. And it kind of goes toward like also things with the light and space movement. And I don't know, I'm interested in art history and I'm interested in a linear progression of art, and so it's something I think about, involving the past with the present, and abstraction's like a problematic thing, but I think it's important. So these are the first works I made in the rain. The ones on the back wall, and so I used a terry cloth, of course, to be absorbed, and they're not towels, they're just mass terry cloth. And it was in the winter, and I put firewood on top of the fabric and then a dry pigment on top of the firewood. Each piece was a different color, and then when it would rain, it would, activate this cold water reactive dye and spread it along the terry cloth, which would absorb it and mix and then leave the negative, which was protected by the firewood, and the firewood would get dyed, and that became this sculpture here. So in a way it's like this a diptych, and so this sculpture also was the first one. The sculpture in the center of the room was the first one I made like this. Well, I'd made other ones before, but this one was the first version of these, and it's a powder-coated sculpture, and I've made a series of them where one side of the panel is UV protected and the other side isn't. UV powder coating is kind of the standardized exterior process, but you can get an interior grade which doesn't essentially have the UV protection, but I can match the color. So like each side of the panel is the same color, like the green is green on the inside, but not UV, etc. And so one side will fade over time and the other one won't. And they're outdoor sculptures. They're usually exhibited indoors at first because the point is that the person or place that has them, ideally a public space, will have it, and over a course of many years it'll fade and you kind of witness the completion of the sculpture rather than its permanence. And the again, it's like a very minimal design, which I think is something that minimalism was great at, and there's no point in changing it. It's like one of my favorite aesthetics, but something that minimalism I feel lacked was emotion and like a natural quality, and in the way that they were very much about permanence and perfect, like kind of perfect structures and aesthetics, and separating itself from what it wasn't. This is kind of about incorporating the environment and the viewer. Instead of acknowledging oneself in relationship to the object, it's more about a symbiotic relationship, I guess. So that just included the incorporation of color and this element of something that could change over time. So it will. Each one's a different shape. So as you can see, like the shadow, for example, on the purple one, that part where it gets more light over time will fade faster than the shadow part, so also it'll begin to hold an impression of the structure itself, kind of like those first paper ones. And then they got a little larger, like this one. And also, these slices are nice because in public places you have to be able to see in them so people don't do bad things in them. And it also made it was a nice surprise because it made it so these nice lines of light would go in through the day and kind of create a sundial effect on the inside of the sculpture. So you have this sort of macro quality of it fading over like a decade versus every day seeing the light of the day pass. And this one you could walk inside, which is cool. Kids love it. So this is one place where I work in LA. It's outside of LA, it's in Pomona. And it's a parking lot that used to store semis. And the works I wanted to show, I guess, with this picture is the ones in front. So you can see these framed photographs on top of walls that I had fabricated, and I helped fabricate. And each image, which you'll see, I think, well, you see how the frames match and they're left outside like this. they match the color of the wall they're on. But like this one, for example, that blue towel in Photoshop, when I use film first, have it scanned, and then in Photoshop I sample a color from the towel or something in the picture. This one was the towel. And then I bring a printout just of that swatch made from the color to Home Depot, where they use a computer to match that swatch and then produce a paint, which I use to paint the frames and the walls. So it's sort of this idea of taking something that's already very inherent in reality, transferring it to film, transferring it digitally, and then transferring it back to its inherent state in a weird way. That's the truck. Those are pink flowers. All the photographs are out of all the windows of my house, which sort of dictated the size of this body of work, which is something I should say I usually work serially, I guess partly because I studied photography, but I think that it expands the meaning of the central idea in different ways you can't expect, and usually that's, for me, controlled by color. So not like, I don't find color to have like a taste or emotional property. It's more of like a categorical, serial property, a separative property. Is it kumquats? So afterwards, when I took the frames off, they had reserved this impression of the original color and without like the dust and smog from LA. And so I actually fixed these. I fixed the dirt and everything. And I flipped the glass. So the glass, as you can see, maybe is speckled with the same dirt. And then they were installed for the exhibition like this, where you would first encounter the images and then the walls that held them, and they're diptychs, but not, and so they're kept together, but not meant to be exhibited in the same visual space, I guess. So, it's this idea of the abstraction really having the utmost like mundane quality of and referring to something in your everyday life, but also the possibility of like a pure abstraction in a way. These sculptures on the ground are based on tombstones, and one here is copper and the other is aluminum, and they're on what is called book-matched marble, so it's like these reciprocal sheets of marble cut from the same stone, and they're an outdoor sculpture, so over time the copper box will oxidize and stain the marble, which is a porous stone, and the other one will kind of stay the same. So you have this constant and variable, somewhat like the colored sculptures marking time passing. Because I walked around Père Lachaise, like this cemetery in Paris, a few days, and when I was there and didn't have anything to do, and it was really cool to see the older sculptures, how they, the older tombstones were really stained, and you could almost like blur your eyes and see the older ones because of the stains. This is another example of the marble and metal. The darker metal there is Corten steel, which will, it's like the Richard Serra steel, so it'll turn orange once it's outside and stain the white marble. This is another example of those sculptures. This Corten steel is already rusting. And the marble has like certain, there's an example. These pieces I wanted to talk about too, just from those, are these pallets that I left, the shipping pallets I left on moving blankets. It's a lot to go through. Those are more of those. There it is outside. So these pieces, when I first got that parking lot in Pomona, these are made with the sunlight, and again, like, in a way, they're these supernatural photograms, but like I said before, the substrate was always dictated by the material, and the material is dictated kind of by the place. So, like I said, it had been a shipping company, and next door, this pallet recycling company, and so that's why I use the shipping blankets and the pallets. But then what I noticed with the pallets was that they're each recycled, so they have this required exterior dimension, but inside they're all repaired by different people or whatever wood, scrap wood, so they have this kind of unique personality. So it had this interesting relationship to the grid for me, and wasn't something I really thought about until after I had started making them. So then I got a lot of them, and this guy just drove them over for me, and I made this piece that extended the whole length of my space, and put them on so that it was kind of like making a town of these people, of these different ones that are all the same but super different. And then it hung like this. So it kind of described in 3 dimensions the space of the parking lot, very well, I thought. These pieces are beach umbrellas that I put in the Santa Monica Mountains outside of Topanga, which was near my house, and I went up there and left them there. These ones were there for like a year and a half, and then I went and reclaimed them and had them unstitched, each triangle, and stitched back with the new ones. So, it's interesting just because they're always decontextualized in an art space, but like when I would drive to my studio from Topanga, I'd always pass the beach and I go surfing and see these all the time, and it was something that would like stick in my mind, but it's also this color wheel, So then I made these rain works because in California I started working outside all the time, and it was sunny, but in the winter we would get like a week of rain or something, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I had these clotheslines where we would dry our clothes, and I put up bed sheets on top of the lines, and again, it's the dry pigment like I used on the wood, and it rained, and afterwards you would have this impression of the line, and the water would separate the dyes. And what was also interesting is there would only be like a few colors on each one, but these cold water dyes you're supposed to mix in a bucket, but when you don't, it's like the pixels on an image, they're made up of many different colors, so when the rain hits it, it speculates it rather than making a homogeneous mixture. So they came out much more colorful than normal, and you can see that you would really get this nice image of the rope. And then so I made some at my mom's house in Vermont, and so like if you see this one is in California and it's super heavy rain and it really speculates one side, and the other side got drenched, and I think it was just like the wind was going one direction, so one side got a lot more action than the other. And then Vermont, I made them again, and it became this super even, double-sided thing. It almost looks like a painting, like a landscape painting on a lake. Like it was such a light rain that it separated it almost perfectly side to side. So that was interesting to me, just because, again, it was describing an environment and not just a process. And then the rope, I thought, I wanted to make an image of that, and I got interested in the clothesline, but I didn't want to just use the clothesline, so I bought this rope at my local hardware store, and I cut out these different sizes of canvas randomly, and then I would measure the perimeter with the rope, which is something I do in the studio a lot, like, installing stuff, just cutting out pieces of rope rather than using a ruler. And so that was, I guess, how I ended up doing this. And then I would put them back on the canvas, so it describes the size of the perimeter kind of pictorially in an abstract way. And then I put the dye only on top of the rope again, and it would rain and spread it. And so you have this image, and then these ones were framed in the rope itself because the rope would get dyed, and so sort of the image becomes the structure in a way of the painting. So again, it's like this self-contained work. You have the subject, the process, and the structure are all kind of right there. I mean, once you know it's rain, I guess. So there's no intermediary in terms of understanding the work, and so it's interesting because my hand is taken away from the whole thing, and the viewer is kind of left to their own devices, but also their own interests and relationships to rain or rope or painting, but also the image as an abstraction isn't really dictated by my hand except for the composition, which is really, there's only so many ways to fit a piece of rope on a painting. I'm always saying that. So then these are flowers that I made, tiger lilies, and that's another one of those sculptures that would fade. And so this is kind of when the merging of a lot of what you've seen came together, in the sense of the rain paintings, where not only could they describe a process, but they could describe a place. So with the quality, I guess, of the rain. And so that became interesting, and how do you further that? And so I started using plants that were particular to an area. So these, again, are at my mom's house. These tiger lilies that she always has had in like our garden. I guess they grow easily. And there's more lattice prints, I guess, I made. I know I made. Okay, so another thing that I was thinking about, and I was never like predisposed to work in nature, I should say. Like, I grew up in Vermont, and my mom is a wonderful painter of botanicals, actually. That's what she does, but it's very like realist, and that's kind of, I guess, why I wanted to study science and like live in a city. But I ended up back here, I guess, by, like, as you've seen, this kind of natural progression from like the pictures in my window all the way to straddling a tree. And I ended up here so I was working with the rain and the sun and thinking of other universal kind of descriptive processes that you could engage with as a visual artist. And I had been thinking about wind for a while. Like, I tried these projects like with fans, blowing that dirt that you saw like over, like with the canvas stretched around. I was just like, not working. And that was like a year before this. And then eventually, so then I ended up making wind chimes, which is another, like, an ironic staple of country living in Vermont that I never thought I'd engage with. But I thought of these sculptures that I've been doing with the oxidation processes. So, well, yeah, so these are wind chimes made out of raw steel and copper, and I worked with a chimer, Jacob, to make them all exactly the same, and we picked out a scale, and so I made these 12 wind chimes that are all the same, essentially. And I went to 12 national forests in California, because California is beautiful and has this really dynamic geographic landscape and a lot of national forests. So I was going to do national parks, but I have this big dog who's not allowed in national parks. And so we went to national forests. This one is Klamath National Forest. And so thinking about oxidation and the process being a descriptive element, like the one by the seaside is going to change a lot more and faster than the one in Joshua Tree, and the sound of each chime will then alter depending on their oxidation. So I left them all in these different national forests for about a year. That's Big Sur. That's Los Padres. That's a billboard of the redwoods. And then I did this show in LA. And you can see the chimes. Then I went back and collected, and they truly did all oxidize differently. There are only 2 missing. And they did sound differently. Like, the rusted ones were very dull and flat, and the other ones kind of remained sharp. And these paintings in the background that you see, I'll talk about in a second. So you can really see the difference. Oh, this is southern, that's by San Diego and Cleveland. This is Big Sur. This one, I think, is Lassen? No. It might be Yosemite. That one's Joshua Tree in the desert, and that one's the one that was that's the one that was by the ocean, the really dark one. So then these paintings, these I made before I made the wind chimes, when I was like experimenting with different tubes for the chimes. And it's another process that I guess I haven't talked about that I do often, where I paint on the photograph with the thing that I've photographed. So in this case, I photographed the raw materials before they had been cut. So they were really long. And then I blew up the photograph even to a greater scale. It's like a 5-foot tall photograph. You see the image which as a photograph usually refers more directly to something or represents it better, the painting is also kind of more indexical because it's actual size and comes from the material itself. So I would dip it in paint and put it on there. That's like a detail. So I had done this before with the tires and like those metal bars, but something I thought about when I was asked to do a book about those painted photographs was to have some kind of counterpoint to it. So I did, and those materials like metal or rubber are these things that never go away and they never deteriorate. So the book was titled Problems with Decomposition, and I did it with these fruits and flowers too. So these ones I would essentially have to like pull an all-nighter and photograph them, drop this film off at night, pick it up in the morning, and then use the fruits before they deteriorated as stamps, kind of like a potato stamp. And you can see here, like this was a huge photograph. These are ones of flowers too. So the printed image kind of becomes just as nice of a representation, if not better. And then I started doing these, before I'd always used monochromes for the works, and then I was thinking about how to, incorporate more imagery as a reference again. And I bought all these textiles that had plants and flowers on them. So I used terracotta pots to make these circles, which we had around our house from the garden. And then I made these photographs at the same time as a counterpoint, and also to have something, this process of working in my studio while these things are kind of baking in the sunlight or waiting for rain. And then these, like those flowers, I made these at my mom's house as well, and these are ferns. Like we had this field of ferns, and so I made these in the rain there. And one thing about working outside, I guess, is you get really accustomed to scale and the scale of working outdoors when you're like, whether you're in the parking lot around cars and this stuff, or like outside in a giant field with trees and everything. So I wanted to do these swaths of land, so I got these giant drop cloths that would take up a nice area of land and cut the ferns, and I'd have to do this at night because they would wither in the sunlight. And so these ones I really made with the mist overnight, and the scale is about 12 by 14. Like this is maybe even smaller than the actual size. And so after doing these, I wanted to make some in LA. And so what you can really see is the different quality of the rain. Like these are really soft and even, and these are palms from my backyard in LA. So they describe the California environment, of course, and whoops, that's a detail of the ferns. Sorry, I'll get to the palms. There's the palms. But you can see the rain's super heavy and even big and short, and it's like, would happen for even just half an hour sometimes, and it was sporadic, so there'd be like, even like you could see dots of the huge raindrops that would hit and splash the pigment and not get washed away. And then I did these trees in Hudson, upstate New York. And then I did this residency in Finland, and coming from LA, I thought it would be great because I could make these rainworks, because I thought it would be raining in Finland when it was. And but I didn't know that there'd be these apple blossom trees bloomed right when I got there, and they have these white flower petals that only last for a week, and then they started falling. So I put the canvases underneath the trees, and the petals fell. And I waited until kind of the end of the process, and then I put the dry pigment on top, and it rained, and then I would shake them off, and well, I guess I don't have any images of the final work. Maybe they'll show up. But you can imagine it's like the other ones. There's these little flower petals, images where, you know, the petal protected it from the pigment like the palms did. And for me, this was actually really a successful capitulation of that process, because not only was my hand removed in the process of like the rain making the painting, but also I didn't even have to place, like I was placing the ferns or the palms, like these, it's totally natural. And so, you know, and the color, I should say too, in all of these works, like, is really random. Because usually they're made at night, and also I just buy a big box of these small pigments, and that's why they're multicolored, and just kind of throw it on there, because again, like, they could be black and white, but then you would lose actually a lot of contrast in like the quality of the rain and everything. So the color kind of provides, it's like, you know, when you do like imaging with a computer, like in biology or something, like it's just a trace of what happened. And so color works better for science or art. Yeah, and so from there, these pieces I made while I was making all those other works in the rain. So again, like the painted photographs or something, you know, I wanted to engage the other process with the sunlight. So these are actually hand-dyed linen where I sewed on fake plants and left outside for about 8 months. And I hand-dyed the linen to kind of match the plant itself, because I couldn't use natural plants, of course, because they'd wither and die and not leave the image. And so this was ivy flowers. I don't know the kinds. And so what's interesting about these works too, compared to the works in the rain, is that, you know, I had to use these fake plants and flowers to achieve the process, but also they're fake, and so they're already like this representation of something. And then here, actually, the response visually I get, and aside from knowing, I believe they look very real, and so it's in a way a more true representation of the thing itself than this plastic flower that you know is fake when you see it. Yeah, it's interesting. And this is at the Madre Museum. I did an installation on the roof terrace, which is made of these volcanic tiles, which is, and it's in Naples near Vesuvius, the volcano, and so these tiles are like, came from that, I guess they said in 1840 when they made this terrace, and then the place that makes them is still in business, so we got more and put them on top. And so this faded over the course of a year, and it just got installed, so I don't have a picture of it in the museum, like hanging through the stairwell, but you can imagine what you see kind of turned white, but the red was preserved. And it was nice for me because this is also a viewing area, and so to have that installation be visible and the process be kind of incorporated has kind of always been something I thought about, and now I could do it. This is funny. It was this train that Doug Aitken had go across country with different things like music and art performances and food on it. And he had asked me to do a project for it, and I did, and I made, and it was really cool. And you know, I loved the train project. But this, I made curtains for the colors of every state that it went through. So there'd be a guy who, as the train entered a new state, every time would go through and hang up the curtains of that state. So when you're inside it, you kind of know where you are, but also when you're outside, you have like this sort of state flag passing. This is New Mexico. And now we get to the Public Art Fund project. And so now, you know, I had this experience with the chimes. And when we were thinking, Andrea and I were talking about the project, which we talked about a lot, was, you know, this interactive quality to the works that was somewhat passive and visual, and how to kind of make that also maybe more, you know, not super physical, but more physically interactive. And so this is a life-size wind chime that each chime is, well, we worked on it, we made an actual scale that was lower because of the size, but each chime is painted twice over, powder coated twice over. So like the purple one, for example, might have like the yellow or blue underneath it, and as it's played over time, it reveals the color. And since they've been played a lot over time and heavily, it's now revealed a nice ring of aluminum around it, which is nice because you see the interactive quality, and it becomes like a part of the work itself. These pieces are these kind of light chambers that you can go into. Oh, I'll get back to them. This is the bench that Andrea was talking about. That is, it's essentially like a mood ring for the outdoors, and it uses that same technology, but they're glass plates, and they have a wide spectrum of temperature since it's going to be there for the whole year. So the thresholds, I think, is like from, I don't know, like 50 or 60 degrees to like 90 degrees. And there's 2 processes of 5 colors that it'll go through. And so the main idea is that if you sit on it, you heat it up or cool it down depending on the temperature it already is. And after you get off, you see an impression of where you were sitting. But also as the temperature changes daily, it changes. And even like we were pleasantly surprised, like shadows from the leaves can change it, so it's very sensitive. Like there you can see it changing from dark blue to like aquamarine as the sun starts to hit it. And then you can see the speckling from the shadows. If you go there, you can even interact with it more, bring like hot coffee or something. This is another one of those sculptures, and we made it more like a maze with these sight lines going all the way through. Oh, there's a nice picture of it. You can see there's the sun hitting it, and it starts to change color. So these scales are, based off the idea of a seesaw, and the idea was to make them function on their own and change on their own. And a lot of this work too is like if you were to pass it in passing, especially for someone who works there, like with the bench, depending on the day it is, you'll notice it's a different color. And with these, they'll go up and down as it rains, and there's a perforation on the top plate of these shapes that are on either end, and so it'll collect rain, and then there's a hole in the bottom back corner, so as one goes down, it starts to drain while the other one is collecting rain, and then that'll go down and start to drain. So they're sort of water reactive, but as you can see, they're human reactive. Kids love them. And the colors too, I should say, like they're of course really inviting, but they're also like a lot of the colors of the original sculptures. I work with this powder coater in LA who does like motorcycles, and they also do stuff for Disney, and they're just like they're not an art fabricator, they're just a general powder coater, and they have a lot of these fun colors on hand, so I've kind of just cycled through them because it's like double the cost to get other colors custom made. So these are those light boxes, and you step inside, there's this kind of little hole so that you can preserve the darkness inside, and then stained glass on top, like this. And so the stained glass is handmade, they're each unique, and they cast the colors with the sunlight in the room, and it's kind of like this nice mini chapel inside, and it's quiet. And then inside the building that it's adjacent to right there, hold on, are these framed photograms. So they're traditional photograms using color paper in the darkroom, where I put the glass, the stained glass on top, and just exposed it to the natural light. And so like film, you get a negative, so the colors like the red becomes blue and the greens become purple, so you get the inversion of the colors made with this manufactured light, and they're exhibited indoors on the color paper. And so that kind of has this nice relationship to the outdoor ones where you can stand outside and the sun casts the natural light, and they're diptychs, of course, and there's 2 or 3 depending, but it's kind of like, it's the exact same one for the adjacent sculpture. It's just, like morning, afternoon, and night, like a lot of light versus a little. And what's cool too is, that I found out later, is the glass, this natural glass, this hand-blown glass that's in the sculptures will change. Like maybe you've seen old glass. It'll continue to move. Oh, so like in 100 years, these actually won't be copies of that glass anymore, which is cool. Oh, there's some examples. So the blue is the glass and the red is the photogram. The red's the glass and the blue is the photogram. There's the green glass and the purple photogram. They have this nice geological quality too. So there's like the bench again. Oh yeah, so I put this at the end of the lecture because it's, again, kind of brand new work. And these are albums that are like naturalist classical symphonies that this old lady who lived next to me gave me like 300 records, and I went through and collected them and picked out those symphonies like Brahms or Vivaldi's Four Seasons being the best example that matched the colors of this fabric, and I got this sparkly fabric. You can kind of see it sparkle there. And put the records on, left them outdoors. You know, I took them out of their covers and put them outside and kind of matched the color of each album cover to the record. And you get this image of the LP and the cover, which is, you know, again, classic Sam. You have this abstraction of the record, and then you also have this obvious thing that once you think about it, you know exactly what it is, but it's also just a circle and a square, like this pure abstraction, which I love. And they'll be installed, they haven't been installed yet, but they're going to be installed in a dark room, spotlit, so they'll have this really dramatic presentation, and they'll sparkle, and there's going to be a soundtrack that plays, which is, oh, here's some pictures of the process. Oh, here's, okay. So if you can imagine those works installed in a room, and then there'll be this soundtrack. And I took Vivaldi's Four Seasons and slowed it down, and it's become a lot of work, but slowed it down to the course of a year so that the seasons, as Vivaldi's Four Seasons land exactly on the 4 seasons of the year, which actually is more difficult than it sounds because the length of each season as it is in the symphony is different, and the length of each season in the year is different, and it changes year to year. So we've had to create this algorithm to translate the information and also bring it up to a proper pitch, because of course when you slow something down in like 1 second becomes about 3 minutes, it sounds so low. So we brought it up to the pitch, and then this algorithm will be playing it every second of every year, and it'll translate it to play forever with the proper season. So, but I thought it'd be cool to share this too. And so this is like the first second of Vivaldi's Four Seasons of spring. And then this is get the idea. It's really beautiful. And it'll be on the internet, and there'll be a webcam from my mom's house of time passing, because the 4 seasons in Vermont are very descript. So that's it.
Sam. Can you hear me? Yes. We're going to have a quick question and answer period. If you want to ask questions, wait for a mic because we're recording tonight's talk. Sam, thank you. That was really exciting to see such a trajectory in your work. I know a lot of people here haven't seen the breadth of your practice, at least probably not in New York. I had some interesting thoughts while you were talking, just in terms of our project in relationship to the other work you're doing. There's a real sense of a distance of your own hand, which is very intentional, but it almost seems a little bit like a score in some ways, like you've set up a situation to make a work. And the situation in terms of the public art show always involves a human interaction, which makes it almost feel a little bit more like a score. And I'm wondering if you've thought about pushing that dimension in another way, or thinking about performance in any way in your work.
Yeah.
Feel like talking about it?
Well, yeah, I'm working on that one performance piece, but that's too much to go into right now.
Okay.
But I think, you know, like what you're saying is there's less of an element of chance involved than performance, where you do set things up and they play themselves out and you have an idea of how they'll play themselves out and what you want to achieve, but the variations are what are interesting. Like I was saying, like why I work serially. Like the rain, you know, it's like, I know, especially now after practice, that I'll get these images, or with the sun, but I don't know exactly what they'll be like.
Right.
And so that is even better with people. It's kind of like the palettes too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Does anybody have questions for Sam up here?
Hi, I'm Jessica. Thank you so much. It was really interesting. My question is, when you set these works up in the sun or the rain, do you have any anxiety about how it's going to turn out? And to that end, do you ever consider any of the finished products sort of like a failure and toss them?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, there's like, there's a lot of editing, so of course, well, I always kind of set up more than I plan to receive, and sometimes they all work, and sometimes I get like 2. And then I'll have to do it again. There was one time when I did it in my another friend's backyard, and they said it was their land, but I guess it wasn't. And someone came and took it all away while I was gone. And there's other things like where the mice chewed through a lot of the fabric, and I, of course, did not plan on that. But then I ended up kind of liking it. But then there's other times where there was so much bird poop that I couldn't use it, you know, like, and there's these elements that I don't have any issues with, actually, like, which is, and it's an interesting line, I guess, of what the plan is, you know. I mean, the more I do it, the grayer that line of what is successful and not gets.
Sam, do you ever make a decision to not, include a work in the editing process based purely on aesthetics?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes my wife does. Just kidding. There's a question there.
Question, okay.
Thanks for the classic, Sam. I was wondering, you had said the first piece was not archival, and then you continued to show pieces that were made in a similar fashion, and they were archival. So I was just curious about that process.
Well, let's see. You mean like how I made them archival, or why I made that decision to make archival work? Yeah, well, I mean, the first ones were made with like a cheap craft paper that had acid in it, so it was kind of a naive decision, I guess, but also like it put me in the right direction. The second type of paper I used, I got like at an art store, and it was nice, and that the fact that it took forever to fade it's like the longer the better, I guess. I don't really care about it so much, but I guess that script has flipped a little in the work of presenting things that are going to keep changing, and in a way those sculptures aren't archival, but turning that into like a benefit rather than a problem is interesting to me. So yeah, I don't know. it's a constant issue with my work. And like the photograph as a document versus like something that can change.
Okay, do we have any more questions, or I think we're probably finished for the evening. Thank you so much, Sam.
Cool.